Here's a quick run through the debate about where power lay inside imperial Germany. This is the first of two paired podcasts. This first one focuses on the Intentionalist School, as we call it. A school is a word we use to describe a group of historians who all share a common interpretation. So, as you can see from the first slide, we break the debate down into the Intentionalist School versus the Structuralist School. The second podcast will explain how the Structuralist School itself is divided into two subgroups, the top down and the bottom up. Anyway, let's look at the Intentionalist School first. There's the mind map. As you can see, there are four strands that this podcast will consist of. What is the argument, the evidence, and the weaknesses. Sorry, that's three strands, not four. So, the argument, first of all. The argument basically is yes, power did lie with Kaiser Wilhelm II. He had a genuine influence. Okay, that's what we call the intentionalist view. So his personality was the key factor in shaping Germany's development at this time. So it's a sort of major argument that the personality, that history is shaped by the personalities of leaders. So the personality of the person at the top of the pyramid is a key factor in shaping historical development. So, using our usual diagram, there's our social pyramid. It shows all aspects of German society. The black line that we have there, that basically is saying power lies above that line. So in this particular case, power very much lies with one person, the Kaiser. That's the intentionalist view. The evidence. Let's run through it. Okay, you need to learn these off by heart. Draw up a list, put it as a flashcard, anything, something like that. But and again, the key words are in bold. First of all, he did have constitutional power. Okay, he did have ultimate decision-making powers. For example, he was the commander of the army. He could personally veto legislation from being passed, etc. So, and he had the ultimate power in foreign policy. For example, treaties could not be made without the Kaiser's support. Secondly, his constitutional powers were bolstered by his own attitude. He believed that he had the right to that power. So it's not just the fact the Constitution gave him power, but he believed he had that right. And of course, the key phrase is the divine right of monarchs. He felt he was accountable only to God. He also showed no respect for any restraint that the Constitution put on his power. So although the Reichstag, for example, had the right to approve legislation, laws could not be made without the support of the Reichstag. Clearly, the Kaiser frowned upon that, and he publicly did. He boasted that he had never even read the Constitution. It showed his attitude towards that. Fourthly, he controlled all appointments. Okay, so unlike, for example, in a constitutional monarchy or a country like our country today, like England today, where the cabinet is effectively appointed by the people through Parliament. In Germany, that was not the case. The Chancellor and the state secretaries or ministers were appointed by the Kaiser, and they were accountable only to the Kaiser. They were not accountable to the Reichstag. So as a result, his own inflated views of his authority did become more pronounced over time, because he effectively surrounded himself with people. So because he surrounded himself only with people who shared his views, and because he did not mix with the people, that view became more pronounced over time. Next point, his approach to government was very different to the approach of Kaiser Wilhelm I, who genuinely give power to his chancellor. So the argument, if you would ask the question, where did power lie in imperial Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm I, that would not be an intentionalist argument. They would say actually power lay lower down in the pyramid. Okay, still high up, still with the chancellor, but it was more with the chancellor than with the Kaiser. Next, in contrast, Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted to dominate. Okay, he did not want the chancellors to be powerful, so he very much retained control at the very, very highest level within his own person. As pointed out there, no chancellor was entrusted with real power. The key attribute, quality, to become a chancellor was loyalty to the Kaiser. Whereas in Kaiser Wilhelm I's day, the key attribute was very much ability. That obviously had significant implications because it meant that the chancellors, and there were only 4 of them under Kaiser Wilhelm II, or 5 if you include Bismarck at the very beginning, but the many of those chancellors were really lacking ability, particularly Hohenlohe, did not have the ability. But none of the chancellors had the great qualities of Bismarck. Next, the 2 key individuals who were closest to William were Prince Philip of Eulenburg, and so again learn those, and Bernhard von Bülow. Now Bernhard von Bülow did become Chancellor in 1900. Those 2 people were flatterers. They inflated the Kaiser's ego. They would tell him he was right. They would say to him, yes, you are accountable only to God. You are not accountable to the ordinary people. Ordinary people do not have abilities to run the country, etc. Okay, weaknesses. Okay, so let's turn it around. This is a bit of an overlap with the structuralist argument, but it is effectively unpicking and saying what are the weaknesses with the intentionalist argument. There's Hans Wehler, who was the leader of the structuralist school. Key weakness: just because the Kaiser claimed to be an autocrat doesn't mean that he was. Okay, we'll see a very similar argument with Hitler. Hitler claimed to be dictator. Big debate, was he actually a dictator? Just because you claim to be doesn't mean you actually are. It was especially the case because the Kaiser's personality, he had those limitations. He had superficial knowledge. He lacked, therefore, real understanding of government, and he was absent from Berlin for a long periods of time. And that was particularly the case during World War I. But even before World War I, after the so-called Daily Telegraph affair, he became increasingly lacking in confidence and did very much leave government to other people. So that's a big weakness of the intentionalist argument. So the Kaiser's influence was therefore at best marginal, is the argument. Again, I put in little quotes. At the back of the Stephen Lee chapters, etc., you'll find, and this one's from the book Lava, you'll find documents, and it's very useful to learn those short extracts from documents and put them into your essays. Even people at the time, one general noted in 1915, we haven't had a working head of state for the last 25 years. As was said, very much during World War I, the Kaiser withdrew. But there's an interesting view for the last 25 years. So that would go back, effectively he's saying we've never really had a proper working head of state with Kaiser Wilhelm II, because that goes back to 1890. Some historians claim that the only policy for which the Kaiser can really be given credit for was the building up of the German Navy, and we'll be looking at that in later lessons. Okay, so that's the intentionalist argument. The second podcast, make sure you play that. We didn't get to cover that in the lesson, so the second podcast is important that you review that, and that will be on the structuralist arguments. That is also up on YouTube. Make sure you play that, and then email me to say that you have reviewed all 3 podcasts.